FAIRtax is coming, don't stand in the way. FAIRtax is coming across the USA. FAIRtax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey! On April 15th, when you're all out of sorts, you got to listen to Linder, believe in boards. The FAIRtax.
Ah, yes, we have got to get rid of the IRS. If ever an agency deserves a place on the scrap heap of history, the Internal Revenue Service is it. We're the FAIRtax Guys. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Ron Malero.
And this is FAIRtax Power Radio, a new program that over the next weeks and months will be explaining why the IRS needs to go away, why the income tax needs to go away, and what's the best thing to replace all that with. And let me give you this right off the top of the head. We have got an email address. If you've got comments or questions that you'd like to contact us, you can write an email to the FAIRtax Guys, all one word, at gmail.com. Again, that's the FAIRtax Guys at gmail.com. And of course, we'll try to research as much as we can and get all the answers to all your questions that we can. And we do appreciate your listening to the program today. And again, Ron, let's get right into the meat and potatoes of this thing here. Because if we're going to tell people that we need a brand new tax system, the first question people are going to ask is, what's wrong with what we've got now? You've got a list about this long. Have at it.
Let's the harp music, please. Let's go back in time here to the ratification of the Constitution. The reason we have the 16th Amendment is because the Founding Fathers did not want an income tax. I even saw a quote from Plato yesterday. That was 2,400 years ago about the evils of income tax. But so there was no income tax allowed. All the taxes that the Founding Fathers were thinking of were basically sales taxes, imposts, duties, and things like that. They're basically consumption tax. And we did very well without it for over 120 years. And then, of course, the progressive era in the beginning of the last century, they just had to put that 16th Amendment in there. And it hasn't been the same since, all right? It started out very simple, but it got very unsimple very quickly.
Yeah, and you know where the idea for an income tax first came, that I saw anyway? 1848, Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. That's one of his points.
Yep, that's right. And it's been basically a disaster. I mean, it started, like I said, it started out very simple, but it didn't stay that way very long. By the time World War II came around, some of the income tax rates were over 90%. I mean, that's just immoral.
That's insane. Absolutely crazy. The Founding Fathers knew what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly. They were right. They did their homework. I was reading an article recently from the Taxpayer Advocate Office. Now, I was wondering, what is the National Taxpayer Advocate Office? It is actually an independent division within the IRS, which is kind of hard to believe. And this Nina Olson wrote a report to Congress. Now, this was almost 2 years ago. It was January of 2013, but the information in it is still very valid. She was complaining about the tax complexity. Congress has consistently added to and altered our tax code 4,680 times since 2001, averaging more than one change per day. Have you folks been keeping up with all those changes? I hope.
I bet you can't name 3 of them in total.
Oh my gosh, it's just unbelievable. The tax code now is over 4 million words, which is about 5 times the length of the Bible and 5 times the length of the tax code that it was in the 1950s. And here we get into the complexity. And, so what if it's complex for people? Well, I'll tell you why, all right? Americans spend over 6 billion hours every year attempting to comply with the Internal Revenue Code, which is the equivalent of 3 million full-time jobs. Imagine that. 3 million full-time workers spending all their time just trying to comply with the tax code. That's crazy.
And the cost of doing that is many times more than the actual tax liability.
Absolutely, especially for small companies. My wife and I ran a small company for a while, and very often if we had a year in which we had a lot of expenses and didn't owe taxes, we still had to pay the accountant to do all our I did the daily bookkeeping, but he corrected my errors and filed the income tax, and so it still cost us. And that happens for many small businesses.
The time that you had to put into it, that's the time that you weren't tending to your business.
And the cost, the monetary cost of just complying with the tax code, according to this Nina Olson, is $168 billion a year. $168 billion. All right, there's only 315 million people in the country. What is that per person? It's outrageous. All right. Also, there's opportunity costs. What does that mean? Opportunity cost. Well, if a business is spending all this time and money worrying about the tax code and spending a lot of resources complying with the tax code, then they're not doing other things. What if it's a nice company that's thinking about adding to their product line? Well, no, they can't do that research this year because it costs too much to comply with the tax code. So it costs opportunity and jobs.
Indeed, it does. Now, there's something that I imagine a lot of people are not really aware of. There is a net tax gap, defined as the amount of money that is owed that is never collected. $450 billion with a B dollars.
Now, when you come up with a figure like that, people kind of their eyes glaze over. But think of it this way: like I said, there's about 315 million people in this country. Divide 450 billion by 315 million. That's over $1,400 per man, woman, and child. To tax gap, the taxes we're not collecting that we should be collecting. And so who makes up the difference? All of us.
Yes.
All the legal taxpayers, the people that do pay their taxes, they make up the difference. You and I, my friends.
And that $450 billion figure, you have to realize, that's just what the IRS admits to. You can find that figure in the IRS's own figures on their website. Now, if that's what they'll admit to, you kind of wonder what it actually is, but we'll go with what their figure says.
Yeah, the real figure is probably lost in an email somewhere.
They can't get it. Of course, now, people have a hard time wrapping their minds around numbers as large as $450 billion. But we've done some research here as for the money this is money left on the table that the IRS will freely admit is owed but is never collected. We did some research on some of the discretionary budgets of various federal agencies. Let's see, the source on that I believe was FairtaxGuys.com. I Googled this up later.
Yep.
And I wrote that down for you. And let's explain to people what we could do, what the government could do at current levels with the $450 billion that it is owed by the current system, and the current system's not collecting it.
All right, the Federal Department of Education, their operating budget is $71.2 billion. Energy Department, $28.4 billion. Health and Human Services, $78.3 billion. Homeland Security, $39 billion. Housing and Urban Development, $33.1 billion. Intelligence Programs, $62.8 billion. Justice Department, $30.5 billion. Labor Department, $12.1 billion. NASA, $17.7 billion. Treasury Department, $13.3 billion. Veterans Affairs, $65.5 billion. Total of 449, just shy of 450 billion. You could run all those federal agencies with the taxes we're not collecting.
All 11 departments there. Again, let me run that by you again, folks. Get your head around this. The IRS admits that it's leaving $450 billion a year on the table that's owed, not collected. And with that $450 billion, if we had another system that would actually collect what was owed, you could run all 11 of those federal departments for a year with what we're not collecting. That's incredible.
Now, I did not notice in there the IRS. I've got some more information here that says that the 2013 operating budget for the IRS was $12.8 billion just to run the IRS. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you know that Things are not going all that great in the IRS, all right? They've had some significant problems in there, all right? Tax expenditures to the government. Now, this is where I take issue with Ms. Olson here. Current tax expenditures cost the government $1.09 trillion in lost revenue. What she's talking about here is the significant revenue lost through complexity, and she's talking about deductions, exemptions, and so forth. Excuse me. When the government does not collect tax money because of a deduction, they're not losing anything. They're just not collecting it. People who talk like that assume that all money belongs to the government, and that it's up to them to decide how much of this money that you've been taking that you get to keep. All right, tax deductions are not an expense to the government. They are money that you keep, that you earned, that you work so hard for. So that's really rankles me when I hear some government official talk about what it costs the government to have a deduction. It doesn't cost the government anything. It cost us plenty in taxes.
Yeah, and they're not collecting what is owed to them. That still continues to just blow my mind right out of the water. But go ahead.
I also don't want people to get the idea that we're totally against government funding. No, we pay our taxes, and right now the income tax is the law of the land. We need to do it as legally and responsibly as possible. And there are good things for the government to do. I heard I was listening to my favorite talk show in the morning the other day, and some lady was talking about, well, the government builds roads and schools. Good, and that is a good thing for the government to do. But keep in mind, the government doesn't build the roads and school. One, they collect taxes from us to fund those projects. Two, they hire private contractors. The government is the agency, you might say, that handles that, makes sure it gets done properly. That's what we want government to do. That's what the founding fathers wanted government to do, okay? Although I'm not sure they wanted the federal government to build schools and to build roads. But still, that's what we do now. Those are the good things for government, all right? Some of the other things like IRS targeting of certain groups, that's not so good. We don't like that part.
Okay, let me toss this in here real quick. A lot of the people, when they first hear about the fair tax, think it's got some kind of political agenda behind it. There is nothing, absolutely nothing in the 133 pages of the fair tax bill that either promotes or hinders the spending priorities of either side. It is not an ideological thing. It doesn't matter whether you're liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian, or what have you. The fair tax only concerns itself with raising the same amount of money that the current income tax system is getting. Now, the fight over what's appropriate and what we should be spending it on and what we shouldn't be spending on, that's another debate for another arena. But the fair tax is simply focused on how do we raise the same amount of money we're getting now, but do it easier, fairer, more transparent.
And you'll hear the term revenue neutral. The fair tax is revenue neutral. That means exactly what Bob just explained. It raises the same amount of money, all right? It is a revenue bill. It is not a spending bill. It does not address spending. And sure, we don't like the way Congress spends some of our money. That's a separate issue, okay? The fair tax has nothing to do with that. Obviously, spending is an important issue, but the fair tax is a revenue issue only. So that's what we'll be talking about.
Yes, and a lot of people also will equate the fair tax with the Tea Party. Now, a lot of people in the Tea Party do like the fair tax, that's certainly for sure. But the fair tax predates the Tea Party by about a decade. It is not a Tea Party idea. It was actually hatched by businessmen in Texas. And not any politician anywhere has got their fingerprints on it anywhere. There's about over $20 million worth of privately funded research to make sure that the fair tax will work as advertised. So that's what we're doing. We're not talking about spending priorities. We're not talking about advancing the Tea Party agenda over the progressive agenda or anything like that. We're only simply talking about raising the same amount of money that the current income tax system does, just do it in a much more efficient, much fairer, and much more transparent way.
And we should remind you as we go along, you can always go to the website fairtax.org. There's copious amounts of information on there. lots of information. If you're not familiar with the FAIRtax, we encourage you to go to that website. There's also several good books. Remember Neil Bortz used to be on the radio, now retired. He pushed the FAIRtax. That's how I learned about the FAIRtax. Listening to Neil Bortz, and when they came out with the book, when he and John Linder wrote the book, I said, "This sounds interesting. I got to read that." So I read it. I gave it to my wife, and I said, "You've got to read this." All right.
Yeah, and same thing with my mom.
Yep.
She had never heard of it before until I gave her the book. She read that and says, "Man, that makes so much sense."
It does.
There's just no way that the politicians can look at that and argue against it in a rational manner.
Yeah, and usually when we're doing presentations to people who have never heard of it before, and they hear our presentation, we take an hour and a half or so to present the whole thing. One of the most common questions is, why aren't we doing this? Well, that's the $64 question, all right? And that's we're going to keep approaching that in this series of talks about the FAIRtax.
Yeah, the short answer to that, though, is that the politicians don't want to do it. The politicians have found that gaming the system for votes and profit has been very beneficial to them, and it doesn't matter what your ideology is, what your party affiliation is. Every politician up there wants to get elected. Every politician up there wants to get reelected, and every politician up there is going to listen to the guys that will contribute to his or her campaign more so than we the people that they're supposed to represent. And so that's one of the things that the FAIRtax is going to do when it gets passed. It will get passed. It's going to make the special interest money much, much less influential than it is right now.
Yep. And Bob is right about selling favors. I mean, there are people in Congress that use the tax code to promote class warfare. All right, it's a really nasty thing, a habit of theirs. But unfortunately, the tax code lends itself to this type of chicanery. All right, and with the FAIRtax, that goes away, because the FAIRtax is a consumption tax. We will pay when we go to the store or pay our bills and so forth, and you can't mess around with it. You can't, if you're going to raise, if some congressman were foolish enough to say, well, I think we need to raise the rate on the FAIRtax, he's going to raise it on everybody. He can't just decide, well, I'm going to make this change for this group or this change for that. You can't do that with the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax is very simple. It's fair for everybody.
All right, well, I think we've made a pretty good case against an income tax in general. It is listen, the most fraud-prone, most error-prone, most invasive, costly, and inefficient way to fund the government imaginable. You could not start with a blank piece of paper and come up with one that's any worse in terms of how invasive it is, how error-prone, fraud-prone it is. That's just the nature of the income tax. That $450 billion tax gap that's not collected, all the enormous compliance costs that you talked about earlier, loss of privacy. An income tax by its nature gives the government the right to know your personal finances. And that's not too good. We mentioned also it's actually a communist idea promoted by Karl Marx. And the Founding Fathers knew it was a bad idea. They originally prohibited it in the Constitution. So let's move forward a little bit here, Ron, and start talking about specifically what is wrong with the IRS as an agency, why that particular government agency needs to go away.
I'll give you one example. If everybody goes to the YouTube website and do a search for Carol Hinders. Carol Hinders. She's a lady that runs a cash-only restaurant. Not even sure what state she's in. Cash only. You don't see that much these days, but she's got a small business. She runs it by herself, and that's what she chooses to do.
Yeah, well, it costs a merchant to accept debit and credit cards and
exactly.
all, so it's a little less convenient for customers, but it's better for the merchant.
Obviously, her customers like it because she's been in business for 38 years. All right, it's a short video. It's about 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes, and you'll find out something that the IRS did to her. They didn't like the fact that she was depositing this money in small chunks. Now, there is a law out there. If you deposit more than $10,000 at a time, you have to claim that money. You have to fill out some form and send it to the IRS. Well, she collects a certain amount every day, or maybe each week, and makes those smaller deposits. The IRS did not charge her with anything, did not call her and ask her what's going on here. They simply swooped in and confiscated over $30,000 from her bank account. And then before breakfast, they'll show you in the she'll tell you about it in the video. All right. there was no accusations of any wrongdoing. They just decided they didn't like the way she was making those cash deposits. All right? Nothing illegal.
Of course, that law you mentioned earlier is to try to catch drug dealers and criminals who are dealing in large amounts of cash.
Exactly.
But, figures on a piece of paper, you can't distinguish between that and this lady that was running a restaurant.
So without any law behind them, without any accusation, they went and did this. Now, for a small business person to lose $30,000 is very serious. She is suing the IRS. She's got another organization behind her. But keep in mind that when the IRS did this, there was no presumption of innocence, no due process rights, no protection against illegal searches and seizures. And if you look at the Bill of Rights, all those things are in there. So how is it possible in America we've got an agency that thumbs their nose to the Bill of Rights? We are all supposed to be guaranteed those rights and many more. All right? The IRS goes around it. As we all know, if the IRS accuses you of something, you are guilty. Period. It's up to you to prove your innocence. There is no presumption of innocence. So it's not a good situation.
Well, they know that, and they know that in a lot of cases, especially in cases of individuals and small business, it's just easier and less costly to just, give in, pay what they say you owe, even if you really don't think you do, because you'd spend a whole lot more money fighting it than you would just paying it.
Exactly. If she were to hire an attorney or a battery of attorneys to sue the IRS, it would cost her dearly. But you'll see in the video, she's got the help of some organization that's going to help her. And of course, that'll probably drag out for years. She's going to be without her money for a long time. We hope the small business lady, who probably hires other people, in her business and keeps them employed. All right. So that's a good thing. She's going to be struggling here for a while she's trying to run her business, while her cash has been confiscated illegally by the IRS. And hopefully she'll have a positive result from the lawsuit. But how many years is it going to take? It's outrageous. It's just outrageous.
It's something that no American should stand for, that the government is allowed to just basically toss the Bill of Rights out the window, declare that you're guilty, seize what you've got with only on their word. And they're the judge, they're the jury, they're the executioner. You really have no standing to fight them.
No, it's outrageous. I mean, Mark Levin calls it a soft tyranny. It's not so soft when they do that. It's pretty hard. All right. Now let's talk about real fraud. All right.
Go for it.
There's a lot of real fraud that's going on. I've got this in one of my emails. I actually got this from several people. Prisoners get millions of IRS in bogus refund claims, watchdog fines. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Prisoners, as in people in jail, are getting our money?
Can we say fraud-prone system?
Yeah. All right. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners are filing phony tax refund claims, and the IRS is not doing enough to quash the problem, according to a watchdog report. According to the report, more than 137,000 phony tax returns were filed in 2012 using a prisoner's Social Security number to the tune of $1 billion, billion with a B. All right. While many of the fake refunds were flagged and prevented, the IRS still issued $70 million in bogus refunds.
That's your money, folks.
Yep. Who pays for that? We do. All right.
Absolutely.
2 Florida men plead guilty to tax fraud. This is a headline in St. Louis. 2 men from Miami pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court in St. Louis to federal charges and admitted stealing identities to commit tax fraud, prosecutors said. And they give these 2 guys names, 125. They're both 25 years old, pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated identity theft. Also pleaded guilty to conspiracy to steal government funds. Prosecutors say that the pair stole the personal information for more than 400 people from 2011 to 2012 and then filled out fraudulent tax returns in their names, in the names of these victims. In all, the conspiracy involved more than 450 tax returns and sought more than $2.25 million in refunds prosecutor said. Of that, more than 490 was paid out. $490,000 was paid out. That's two people. 490,000. They were caught. That's good. But where's that money? Yeah. And whose money is it? Yes, my friends, it's our money. Okay.
Oh, well, time flies when we're having fun here. I tell you what, we're going to have to kind of wrap this up for this session. We've got plenty more that we'll be hearing on FAIRtax Power Radio as we go along. But again, I've heard some people say that they defend the income tax on the grounds that it's all computerized. The government knows how much you make. They know how much you report. The computers put it all together, and that it's really not a very fraud-prone system. You can only laugh at somebody like that.
Yeah.
But the question now is, if we want to see the IRS go away, and I would think any American, again, regardless of political ideology or party affiliation, would like to see those kind of abuses become a thing of the past, because if the IRS can be used against you, it can be used against me. And so
and anybody listening,
if it's after your enemies, it will eventually turn on you. So what do we fix this? There is an organization called Americans for Fair Taxation, AFFT. Their website, FAIRtax.org, that's the national organization, and there are a lot of state organizations under there. And what we need, more so than your money, it'd be nice to get a little money to work with, but more so than your money, we need membership in these organizations. Ron, touch on why.
We are going to be opening an office in Washington, D.C. next month. It's for the purpose of lobbying Congress, all right? I've been involved in the fair tax for about 5 years. Other people have been involved a lot longer. Now, I don't know of a previous lobbying office for the Americans of Fair Taxation. To me, this is a first, but this is a big deal, okay? And if we're going to have our fair tax lobbyists in Washington go to Senator Smith and say, Senator Smith or Congressman Jones, you need to get on board. Here's the fair tax. Here's what it's about. Here's all the co-sponsors we already have, all right? They're going to want to know, well, what organization you're speaking for. I'm speaking for the Americans for Fair Taxation, and we have over 1 million members. Well, that's what I would like them to say. We are doing a big membership drive now. We need numbers. You can become an annual member for as little as $5. Please go to fairtax.org and become a member. It is critical because we have to push these people. We have to lead our leaders to the proper conclusion about tax reform. We can't just nibble around the edges and and add more pages to the current tax code. We need to scrap the tax code, put in the fair tax. All right, there's no other way to do it. So we need your cooperation. Not so much your dollars, but we need your bodies. All right, you need to go to fairtax.org and work the website there and become a member.
All right, and once again, we are the FAIRtax Guys on FAIRtax Power Radio. Our email address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Questions, comments, send to those. And Ron, we will have to catch them next time. So everybody, let me remind you of one thing. The fair tax, once you understand it, you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming, don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming across the USA. Fair tax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey! On April 15th, when you're all out of sorts, you got to listen to lenders, believe in boards. The fair tax bill, it's a much better way. It makes April 15th just another spring day. Fair tax is coming, don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming, roll the USA.